Hello, YouTubers. Welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. I have 6 articles for you in this episode, and I'll have another episode to follow this one. There's about another half a dozen, I guess, to bring you all up to date on this news. All of these URLs, of course, are in the description of the video, so you can pull them up and do whatever research you need to do on them. The first one we have here is off of the businessinsider.com, and it says all clear given after brief evacuation at Trump Tower. Actually, I have the first 2 articles here on this particular subject. This one says Trump Tower in New York City was evacuated on Tuesday afternoon after a suspicious package was found in the lobby, according to authorities. Shortly after 5 p.m. local time, the New York Police Department reported that the situation at Trump Tower was all clear. The package was a bag with children's toys, authorities said. President-elect Donald Trump is currently in Florida. The New York Police Department bomb squad responded to the situation out of an abundance of caution. J. Peter Donald, New York Police Department's Assistant Commissioner for Communication and Public Information, wrote on Twitter on Tuesday afternoon. Trump Tower is a 58-story skyscraper located in Midtown Manhattan on 5th Avenue between 56th and 57th Streets. The skyscraper is currently used as the headquarters for the Trump Organization, houses Trump's primary residence, and has been the primary site of Trump's presidential transition efforts since his November election victory. Traffic grinded to a halt after the evacuation on Tuesday afternoon, according to New York Times reporter Sarah Maslin-Nur, who reported that police closed Madison Avenue between 55th and 58th Streets. And they have some links to some videos from that if you want to pull this up to take a look at those. Let's see, one of them apparently is on Twitter, one's on NBC Nightly News, one's on Civiliation, and there's a couple more of them here, it looks like, so you got a lot of viewing pleasure there. The next one we have is off of NBC New York.com, and this one says the lobby of Trump Tower was briefly evacuated late Tuesday afternoon as police investigated a suspicious package that turned out to be an unattended backpack filled with children's toys, the NYPD tells NBC4 New York. Visitors in the lobby of the building at 56th Street and 5th Avenue were seen being ushered out quickly. NBC cameras show many began sprinting out as armored police yelled, "You got to get out, let's go." A senior New York police official tells NBC News that a suspicious knapsack located near the Nike Town store in the building, or Nike, I guess it is, Nike Town store in the building, led officials to clear the area in Trump Tower atrium, which is open to the public. A bomb squad was called as a precaution to investigate, and the bag was deemed safe shortly afterward, the New York Police Department said. It contained children's toys. The investigation exacerbated gridlock around Midtown block, which has already been partially closed off since Trump was elected president. Holiday traffic and rush hour traffic had also congested the area. President-elect Donald Trump lives in the tower and has offices there, though he was at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida when the bag was discovered. His newly appointed press secretary, Sean Spicer, tweeted that officials were back to work following the false alarm. And there's several videos in this if you want to take a look at those. It says that prompted Mayor Bill de Blasio's press secretary, Eric Phillips, to fire back on Twitter, "No problem, we'll send you the bill." The Twitter tiff resignates de Blasio's request that the federal government reimburse the city's $35 billion to keep the president-elect safe through the inauguration. Congress has only offered New York City $7 million. It is not clear how much it would cost to protect the president-elect and his family once he moves into the White House after the January 20th inauguration. Trump's wife, Melania Trump, and their son, Barron, plan to remain in Manhattan until at least the end of the school year, but Trump says he will make frequent trips back to New York City to see his family. The security includes a New York Police Department detail at Trump Tower, the Fifth Avenue skyscraper where the president-elect lives and works. The amount sought by New York City covers security costs between November 8th and January the 20th. Trump Tower, in addition to being the president-elect's home and business headquarters, contains residences, restaurants, retail stores, and a lobby that, by law, is open to the public, to visitors daily from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Police receive about 42 reports every day of so-called suspicious packages, though that number can surge depending on current events. In the days after the pressure cooker bomb exploded earlier this year in New York City, police responded to more than 800 calls of suspicious packages. Maria Beckford, visiting New York from her native London, was in Nike Town with her 13-year-old son looking to buy a pair of soccer cleats when she said they were told to urgently leave the store. We actually had them in his hands, but because of everything, we just had to leave, she said. Law enforcement and military have recently been training on how to safely bring Trump out of New York City in case of an emergency. U.S. military planes spotted flying over Midtown a few weeks ago turned out to be part of an emergency relocation drill to figure out where the military choppers could touch down near Trump Tower and move the president-elect and others out towards safety. So there you have a couple articles on about the Trump Tower. The next one that I have for you is off of National Interest, and it says, "The time for strategic patience is over. Donald Trump must confront North Korea." And this starts out with an editor's note, and it says, TNI's January-February 2017 print issue convened a symposium on the most significant national security challenge awaiting the Trump administration. And they have a link where you can read all about that. And this article starts off here with, each of the last three presidents has arrived in the White House to find a terrifying file on their desk entitled North Korea, full of grim warnings about an isolated hermit kingdom bent on developing nuclear weapons that could reach the continental United States. Each was urged to do everything in his power to prevent this nightmare, yet each ultimately chose to look the other way and relegate North Korea to the category of future problems that someone else will have to deal with. They all tried some mixture of negotiations and sanctions to persuade the North Korean regime to back off, and when that failed, they simply played for time, hoping Pyongyang would eventually return to the table for serious talks. The Obama administration even devised a name for waiting out called strategic patience. Donald Trump will have no such luxury. Given all the other problems and crises that will fall into his lap, he too will be tempted to downgrade North Korea to second tier, but Trump will not be able to punt. This time, it really is different. After 5 nuclear tests, a flurry of missile launches, some failures, but some at least partial successes, and advances in warhead miniaturization, North Korea's nuclear program now has a critical mass that can no longer be avoided. James Clapper, the outgoing director of national intelligence, gave the game away last month when he admitted that getting North Korea to give up its nuclear program was now a lost cause. Nuclear weapons, he admitted, are their ticket to survival. So what can Trump do differently? One of the reasons that the previous 3 administrations stuck to the same failing path is that the other options were so poor. Those options are no better now than Pyongyang is on the verge of being an actual rather than potential threat to the United States, but he will have to try something. Given North Korea's advances, there has been a surge of talk about potential preemptive strikes on its missile facilities, including from figures such as Mike Mullen, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But President-elect Trump would have to take into consideration the same risks that have always made this a Hail Mary: the potential damage to Seoul as Pyongyang unleashes a missile avalanche in retaliation. China might also feel obligated to come to the defense of its treaty ally. Alternatively, Trump could order his administration to swallow its pride and return to the negotiation table before North Korea has made any concessions. He could frame this as recognition of reality and argue that no one has actually tested Kim Jong-un to see if he has any room for flexibility. And what about the potential theater of a Trump-Kim summit? He would own cable news for a week. But the objective of a new round of talks is unclear. If the argument were that the United States needs a new approach because North Korea is on the verge of becoming an undeniable nuclear power, why would it make concessions in new negotiations? Pyongyang would likely push for a series of commitments from Washington that would upend security arrangements for the entire region. And although the United States would issue a denial, it would look to the world as if Washington were recognizing North Korea as a legitimate nuclear power, Pyongyang's ultimate objective. The domestic politics are also lousy for Trump. He is already preparing for bruising fights with Senate Republicans over things he sees as his actual priorities, such as infrastructure and funding. Does he really want a major battle over North Korea? That leaves one other option, and one non-military approach that has never been tried: China sanctions. Every direct sanction the United States has thought of as being applied on North Korea, but that is not the case with most of the Chinese entities that trade with Pyongyang and are its effective economic lifeline. The objective would be to impress on Xi Jinping that the United States is at its wit's end. Either China really puts a squeeze on its ally to give up its nuclear weapons, or it will feel the impact. More missile defenses in South Korea and Japan, something Beijing would hate, could also be on the table. There is no guarantee of success, of course, but the Trump administration can suggest that if this approach fails, the pressure for the U.S. preemptive strike will grow and grow and grow. The one thing Trump has said about North Korea is that the United States should leave it to China to solve the problem. That will not happen by itself. Trump will need to give Beijing some encouragement. And there's another page here to this, so let's check that one out. Page, apparently all that has on it is a picture, and it's the same picture that was on the first page. So there you have that article. Okay, the next one we have, the fourth of the sixth article, it says, this one is off of the Gatestone Institute, and it says, the UN declares war on Judeo-Christian civilization. How is it that Western jurisprudence created after the Second World War to prevent more crimes against humanity is now being used to perpetuate more crimes against democracies? It is a dreadful manipulation to try to erase all Jewish and Christian history to make believe that all the world was originally and forever only Islamic. That's what jihad looks like. It is not just orange jumpsuits, beheadings, and slavery. If one can erase and rewrite history, one can redirect the future. If Palestinian men beat their wives, it's Israel's fault, argued UN expert Deprava Samanovic with a straight face. Last month, the president of the UN General Assembly sported the famous Kiafa scarf as a symbol of the Palestinian resistance, Red Terrorism. This is simply the continuation of the cultural obliteration of Israel, which is supposed to justify next its physical obliteration. The UN's war on Israel's Jews is at heart a war against the West. the UN and its backers are briskly paving the way for the European Caliphate. 2016 has been a sumptuous year for the anti-Semites as the United Nations. The UN Security Council just targeted the only democracy in the Middle East, the State of Israel. The outgoing Obama administration reportedly orchestrated what even Hartez called hit-and-run campaign in UN to denigrate the Jewish state and leave it to fate where only conflict and hate loom. This is a cultural genocide that is no less dangerous than terror attacks. It is based on anti-Semitic lies and creates the atmosphere not for achieving peace, as disingenuously claimed, but for perpetuating war. UNSC Resolution 2334 is the culmination of a dizzyingly fruitful year for anti-Semites. Last November, committees of the UN General Assembly in a single day adopted 10 resolutions against Israel, the only open society in the Middle East. How many resolutions have been approved against Syria? Against the rogue state of North Korea? 1. How many against Russia when it annexed Crimea? 1. Hael Noor of the UN Watch observed, even as Syria President Bashar Assad for the final massacre of his own people in Aleppo, the UN adopted a resolution drafted and co-sponsored by Syria, which falsely condemns Israel for repressive measures against Syrian citizens on the Golan Heights. It's obscene. The resolution was approved for those states which really abuse human rights, such as Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Venezuela, China, or Cuba, not to mention many virtual tyrannies throughout Africa. Only one resolution was approved for the Palestinian refugee properties, but not even a single mention for the property of the Iraq Christians in Mosul. Another resolution in this racist banquet of the United Nations concerned the application of the Geneva Convention in the occupied territories. There are hundreds of territorial disputes in the world, Cyprus, but only Israel deserves to be called out. According to the liars at the United Nations, the most in the world is Israel. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid Ra'ad, and Jordan's Prince Zayed Al Hussein are sponsoring even now a blacklist of international companies that have ties with Israeli companies in Judea, Samaria, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights to facilitate boycotting Israel in the event economically exterminating the only democracy and pluralistic nation in the region, the Jewish state. The UN envoy for children and armed conflict, Leah Zerougi of Algeria, suggested also including the Israeli army in the blacklist of countries and groups that regularly cause harm to children, along with Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, the Islamic State, the Taliban, and countries such as the Congo and Central African Republic, child soldiers, but of course not the Palestinians, who continue to promote using children as combatants and children as martyrs. How is it that the Western jurisprudence created after the Second World War to prevent more crimes against humanity is now being used to perpetuate more crimes and against democracies? The Rights Commission condemned Israel as the world's only violator of women's rights, not Syria, where Assad's forces used rape as a tactic of war, or the Islamic State, which enslaves women from religious minorities. Not Saudi Arabia, where women are punished if they do not wear the Islamic full covering, scorching temperatures, or drive a car or even leave the house. Not Iran, where adultery, which can include being raped, is punishable by being stoned to death. And if Palestinian men beat their wives, it's Israel's fault, argued the UN expert Dubravka Sumovic with a straight face. The UN's World Health Organization also singled out Israel as the only violator in the world of mental, physical, and environmental health, despite the only state in the world actually to give medical care to its enemies. children. Canadian law professor Michael Link was appointed to the UN's impartial investigator of alleged Israeli human rights violations, despite his long record of anti-Israel lobbying, including his board membership on many pro-Palestinian organizations, including Friends of Civiliation and the National Council on Canada-Arab Relations. The UN Cultural Agency, UNESCO, by magically declaring ancient biblical Jewish sites Islamic, even though Islam did not historically exist until the 7th century, hundreds of years later, pretended, with the villainous complicity of the West, to erase the Jewish Christian roots of Jerusalem. It is a dreadful manipulation to try to erase all Jewish and Christian history to make believe that all the world was originally and forever only Islamic. It is a jihad. That is what the jihad looks like. It's not just orange jumpsuits, beheading, and slavery. One can erase and rewrite history, or try that again. If one can erase and rewrite history, one can redirect the future. If you do not know where you're coming from, what values will you defend or fight for? Names matter. If it is Jewish, then it is called Judea and Samaria. If it's Palestine, you can say the Jews stole it, and that Israel is a colonialist construct based on injustice. Why then is no one pointing to the entire continent of South America conquered from the native Indians by Cortez, Europeans with guns? The latest UN Security Council resolution against Israel is not about settlements, but the old city of Jerusalem. Reset history, not at 1967, but at 1948, the year Israel was born. When Marcel Breuer and Bernard Zerfus designed UNESCO's building in concrete and glass at the Place Portnoy in Paris, and Pablo Picasso donated frescoes to it, imagined the rebirth of Western culture after the tragedies of war, the Holocaust, and the Nazi nightmare. Never in any other spot on earth were words such as education, science, culture, freedom, peace, and brotherhood repeated so many times. There was hope and commitment that the future would be better, not worse. But the dream lasted no longer than a few minutes of the announcement. The Soviet Union had restrained UNESCO's cultural programs with the red communism, such as when UNESCO promoted a new world information order, the goal was to end the dominance of the Western press, presented as a threat to the cultural identity of the third world nations. Under the Eiffel Tower, my tongue's tied. Authoritarian and anti-Western third world then took control of the UN Cultural Center, which became, according to the Washington Post, overly bureaucratic, costly, wasteful, and imbued with anti-Western, anti-capitalist bias. Since then, Israel continues to be treated as a parish by these ideological and corporal criminals on the scene. Even after that, in 1975, the UN body tipped its hand by propagating the anti-Semitic blood libel of Zionism is racism. Last month, the president of the UN General Assembly, Peter Thompson, sported the famous checkered scarf, the kippah, and I'm assuming I'm pronouncing that correctly, a symbol of the Palestinian resistance, red terrorism. This is simply the confrontation of the cultural obliteration of Israel, which is supposedly to justify its physical obliteration. The fate of Judeo-Christian civilization, Christianity as well as Judaism, on which all our values are based, is tied to the fate of the state of Israel. If Israel ceases to exist, so does Christianity. The world has been witnessing how the few Christians and other non-Muslims still remaining in the rest of the Middle East, once the glorious Christian Byzantium are being slaughtered now that the Jews and Greeks are gone. This war on Israel's Jews is at heart a war against the West. The UN and its backers are briskly paving the way for European caliphate. Next article that I have for you is off of the Common Sense Show, Dave Hodges, and it says, the Red Dawn invasion of the U.S. is being put into motion. A clearer picture of what appears to be a trigger event for the eventual invasion of the United States is presently underway. This is the trigger event which will likely bring the Chinese directly into Mexico and forge a quick partnership which will stand in opposition to the United States. 10 Mexican states hit by gasoline shortages. Pemex blames theft from the pipelines. It says Mexico City. At least 10 Mexican states over the past few days have suffered serious gasoline shortages, which the state oil company, Pemex, attributes to the clandestine theft of fuel from the pipelines. We are currently taking various measures to reestablish the adequate and opportune supply of gasoline and diesel to the country, Pemex tweeted. As local media have reported over the past few hours, the lack of fuel at gas stations affects at least 10 states of the nation, FE News Agency reports. The states hardest hit are Michigan, which on Friday reported severe problems in several cities due to the lack of fuel, as well as, oh gosh, it's got 3 75-cent names here. Aqua Calientes, I'm guessing, Guanajuato, and Zonestes. Just guessing I got those right. Other regions like Oaxaca, Chihuahua, Guerrero, Morelos, Puebla, and it gives about 4 or 5 other ones here. It says are also experiencing gasoline shortages in a number of their cities. I'm figuring that most anybody that's listening to this probably don't know where those, what those names are either. On December 21st, Pemex announced the suspension of operations on the Samalacan-Leon pipeline due to the clandestine drainage, which interrupted the arrival of the fuel to a number of regions around the country. Logically, there are only 2 legitimate suspects in this theft of Mexican energy. One, Obama and the CIA working together in a joint endeavor to establish a Chinese-Mexican energy alliance. Or 2, China is trying to get their hooks further into Mexico. And 3, both China and the CIA are working together to make Mexico pivot away from the United States to China for its energy needs. Chinese investment into Mexican energy. The recent Mexican energy crisis, which has already been attributed to sabotage, is not the first time that the Chinese have shown interest in marrying their energy interests with Mexico. As far back as April of 2016, we see indicators of that fact. As reported in Mexico Daily News, or try that again, Mexico News Daily, China's CITLA and Mexican government inked a $200 million energy deal with the support of the UN funding arm. Mexico's energy sector is attractive enough to the World Bank's private sector investment arm that it will participate in a US $200 million investment in a new oil company. The International Finance Corporation, or the IFC, will put up $60 million, and the private equity firm China Mexico Fund, which is managed by an IFC subsidiary, the remaining $140 million to fund oil exploration and production by Citla Energy. It is my position to not believe in coincidences. The present energy crisis in Mexico has been planned for at least 8 months, with China ready to step in and back up the slack, or pick up the slack, in Mexican energy needs. The participation of the World Bank brings in the United Nations to the equation, unless I start becoming a coincidence theorist, I can draw no other conclusion than the present state of affairs with regard to Mexican gas shortages, as well orchestrated plot designed to bring Mexico and China closer together and further separate Mexico and the United States. Why? California is leaving America, only with a twist. They are doing so with the help of the Communist Chinese and the Mexican government. Governor Brown is financing Calexit with the Bank of China, HSBC Bank, and with the independent help of George Soros. Paul Preston has insider sources at the California State Capitol, as well as a convert source who has been in the meetings regarding Calexit. The source must remain confidential because of the threat to his life. According to Preston's source, the Chinese energy groups, such as Chinese military, the Bank of China, 3 members of the Obama administration, the Mexican consulate, La Raza, and many of the Mexican drug cartel's leadership and key members of the Californian legislature are in the league together. This is a convoluted web of deceit and corruption and is all sorted out in the following video, and this report serves to validate the claims made in the previous paragraphs. The following 2 interviews provide intimate details of the claims made in this article. The following interviews are not designed to present new information, but rather to provide documentation for the claims made in this article. It is not necessary to listen to the 2 interviews to understand the plot against America. And the links or the actual videos are here for you to click on in this article if you want to pull those up at your leisure. And the article goes on and says Paul Preston has also uncovered evidence in addition to the Communist Chinese, Governor Jerry Brown, the drug cartels, the Bank of China, members of the California legislature, and the Mexican consulate are ultimately involved in Calexit. The UN is also involved in helping California to become its own country under the control of the United Nations. Remember, the energy deal between China and Mexico was done with World Bank participation. Therefore, this brings the United Nations into the plot. The following interview answers so many questions as to what was the real story behind the California drought. This interview is riveting and plays like a spy novel, except this is real life, and this event will push America into the state of famine. Further, these groups have openly discussed that if they cannot peacefully leave the United States, then these groups will engage in widespread violence, namely the random murder of white people at public events. There is the second interview, which validates the claims made in the previous paragraphs. On December the 15th, 2016, Paul Preston told me that Calexit had opened an embassy in Russia. On December 18, 2016, Russia Today published the following, and here it is, quote, a campaign calling for the independence of California from the United States has opened an embassy in Moscow. The movement, yes, California is hoping for a Calexit break from the U.S. Speaking at a press conference on Sunday, Louis Martinelli, leader of the movement, said the embassy will not deal with diplomatic issues, but will act as more of a cultural center that will educate Russians about California's history, boost trade ties, and promote tourism, unquote. And let's see, then there's an insert here. It says, follow CIA Embassy Moscow. Today's Embassy of the Independent Ripu. We're not requesting military assistance from Russia, Martinelli explained. We're certainly going to request recognition of our independence and recognition of our 2019 independence referendum result, as we're going to request that the entire international community recognize the results. Look of California opens in Moscow. We're not requesting military assistance from Russia, Martinelli's Calexit representative explained. Okay. And then it says, does it get any more official than this? But there's more. All 3 states on the Pacific coast voted for Hillary Clinton. The election of Donald Trump has spurred discussions about all 3 states leaving the United States and being annexed, believe it or not, by Canada. And that's California, Oregon, and Washington, the entire West Coast. It says the Cal-Exit movement, formed in response to Donald Trump winning the presidential election, has enveloped California's West Coast neighbors and spiritual counterparts, Washington and Oregon. 3 Pacific Coast states overwhelmingly voted for Hillary Clinton. She received 55% of the vote in Washington, 62% in California, and 52% in Oregon. Is this crazy talk? Probably, but residents of the West Coast have a lot in common with our northern neighbors. The 3 states have long been working with British Columbia to combat climate change. All 3 new potential provinces have legalized cannabis, which Canada is moving toward. Don't forget Canada's universal health care. It appears that Cal-Exit will take California out of the proposal, and the Canadians have modified their proposal to include just Oregon and Washington. The Canadian government sent 150 maple trees to Oregon and California as an enticement to follow through. As if this was not enough, please look at the following video, which details how Canada is letting Chinese warships into Canadian harbors. What does it all mean? Mexican cooperation is needed in order to launch a Red Dawn invasion of the United States. It's been secured through the creation of fake Mexican energy crisis in which Chinese come to the rescue. Mexico has demonstrated where their loyalties lie with regard to the United States through their explicit support of Cal-Exit. Putin has shown his true colors, though through recognizing Cal-Exit, though the creation of embassy in Russia. Therefore, Mexico will become primary conduit from which a Red Dawn invasion will take place. If the Canadians complete a West Coast sweep, the United States will be left without an ocean front to its western half of the country. Easier an invasion of the United States would be if there was no West Coast. Further, the West Coast will serve as a base of operations for the invasion of the rest of the United States. Operational details will be provided in part 2 of this series. So there is that article. And the final one in this episode is off of Natural News, and it says, leftists tolerance on display as unhinged liberals call for genocide against whites and attacks on conservative cripples. As the unhinged political left continues to unravel into what can only be called psychopathic mental illness, I thought it might be educational to bring you 4 recent shocking episodes of left-wing tolerance on display. As you review these, remember that tolerance of the left is selectively applied only to those who agree with every important political narrative of liberalism. Anyone who disagrees with the false narratives of the left is targeted for extreme hatred, death threats, and now even called to be exterminated by actual genocide. This is what happens when the party of love loses the election. They turn to hatred, violence, and deeply rooted desire to literally kill everyone who doesn't agree with them. Example number 1, left-wing hate monger attacks Texas Governor Greg Abbott for being a cripple. Twitter user attacked Texas Governor Greg Abbott for his religious faith and asked him why God has never helped him walk again. Abbott has been confined to a wheelchair since July of 1984 when a tree fell on him, breaking his back. He was running with a law school friend at the time through a neighborhood in Houston. The Twitter user, it's at DSCHLICK, tweeted out, "Hey, Greg Abbott, Texas, since you are so holy and close to God, when's he going to make you walk again?" For the record, Texas Governor Greg Abbott is far more a courageous man and visionary leader than Obama or any left-winger could ever hope to be. There's simply no comparison. Governor Abbott is a man I would be honored to call president one day. Example number 2. Left-wing Drexel University professor calls for genocide against whites. A professor at Philadelphia's Drexel University has a heartwarming Christmas message. Associate Professor of Politics and Global Studies George Ciccarello Mayer is wishing for a white genocide. Talking to his Twitter account on Christmas Eve, Ciccarello Mayer himself, a white man, tweeted, "All I want for Christmas is white genocide." The professor, who describes himself as a visiting researcher at El Instituto de Investigaciones Sociales in Mexico, and I probably butchered that all up, also has had praise for massacre of whites. The professor's Twitter feed is filled with hateful, obnoxious messages, anti-Americanism slams of President Donald Trump, attacks on Jews, as well as pro-Black Lives Matter and pro-communist sloganeering. Yes, this is love and compassion from the left, demonstrating the tolerance for all humankind that we're told is exclusive to liberals. Gosh, achieving diversity is almost instantaneous if all whites are exterminated in a new left-wing Holocaust, isn't it? Good thing we have Second Amendment, I would argue, so that we can defend ourselves against violent left-wing wackos when they try to commit genocide against innocent women and children who happen to be Caucasian. Example number 3, extreme harassment of female college students by Clinton supporters caused her to drop out. Freshman student Andy Mortz at Bryn Mawr College has dropped out after what she says was unbearable harassment from her fellow students for supporting President-elect Donald Trump. Mortz told the English House Gazette Bryn Mawr student blog that a low point came when she was approached by a peer mentor in her dorm who, instead of offering support, began to vilify her. The peer mentor said Mortz had personally attacked other students by expressing support for Trump. Mortz told Philly.com the response was so hostile she ended up calling a suicide hotline for support. Later, she visited a campus counselor who says she wasn't very helpful. So, according to college student snowflakes, merely supporting Donald Trump is a personal attack on their entire student body. Yes, this is how insane and mentally ill the left-wing colleges and universities have become in America. To them, genocide against whites is good, but supporting a Republican is an attack against everyone. Example number 4, Ivanka Trump stalked, harassed on commercial flight by insanely angry left-wing nutjob. Ivanka, who was with her husband, Jared Kushner, and 3 children, was harassed by a male passenger who told her that your father is ruining the country before declaring that she should be flying private. As the man continued his tirade, he was removed from the flight and could be heard screaming, "You're kicking me off for expressing my opinion," as he was taken by security. The husband of the passenger, Matt Lasner, later took on to Twitter to recount the event, where he boasted how his husband was chasing them down to harass them. To summarize the left tolerance, if you agree with genocide, verbal assaults, and extreme threats against cripples, then you are tolerant and even progressive. So now we really get down to the root of the liberalism, which is best described at this point as a mental disorder. The most fervent advocates of liberalism are violent, unstable nutjobs, conspiracy theorists, and wackos who fake hate crimes against themselves with shocking frequency. Nearly every hate crime reported by the Huffington Post, MSNBC, or CNN later turns out to be false flag hoax committed by leftists against themselves. The mass psychosis of the unhinged left stems from the deep linguistic programming of the hypnotic left-wing media, which has literally programmed left-wingers into near Manchurian candidates to be activated at any moment against conservatives. To top it all off, left-wing wackos are now convinced that the KKK is everywhere. Russians hacked the election. Genocide against whites is diversity, and chopping up living human babies for organ harvesting is women's health. The extreme violence, delusional narratives, and unbridled hatred now being demonstrated by those on the left isn't merely amusing, it's dangerous to society. Hillary Clinton's theme of fun camps now have a whole new use under President Trump. I sense that we're rapidly approaching the day where we, the people, are going to have to quite literally institutionalize many of these left-wing nut jobs and subject them to some sort of deprogramming therapy in hopes of being able to allow them to eventually return to society with their mental faculties restored. Some of them have become so unhinged and completely out of touch with reality that they no longer function in society without posing a very real threat to the people around them. Perhaps after January 20th, President Trump can help America heal by calling for a nationwide treatment program for delusional, paranoid leftists who have been put into a state of mental derangement by CNN, the New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, and left-wing hate-spewing political grunts like Michael Moore. A mere 30-day timeout from left-wing media might allow a large number of its victims to finally come to their senses and wake up from their hypnosis programming. Good thing we already have Hillary Clinton's fun camps built and ready to be put to good use, eh? Now we finally know the greater purpose, serving as de-hypnosis centers for mentally ill leftists who can no longer function in a democratic society. And that's all I have for you in this episode, but there'll be another episode here in a little bit. If you enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up, share it around so everybody gets to hear the news. Don't forget to subscribe and click that little bell beside that subscribe button and check that box so that you get email messages every time I put a show out. We'll see you in the next one.